It's time for a January wrap up. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bandits and Bookworms. My name is Deidre, and today we're going to be talking about every book that I read in the month of January in this year, 2024. So I'm recording this January 31st. I just started a new book. I'm not going to finish it this month, so therefore, I'm done. I've read all the books I'm going to read in January, which is pretty wild. How did we get here already?
Time is an
Stare at the dark
illusion.
too long and you'll begin
Don't
to see what
calculate how
isn't
much time you
there.
spent reading books.
But anyway, we are going to talk about every book I read in order in 2024. I guess that's true, because I've only read these books in 2024. These are the only books I read in 2024 so far. This month, I read 10 books successfully, and I DNF'd one book. First, we'll start with the book that I DNF'd, which is Snow Falling on Cedars by Dave Guterson. I really think I just wasn't in the mood for this. I think largely this has to do with the fact that I wasn't a huge fan of the audiobook, and then I just kind of never sat down and got it on Kindle or in physical form or anything. So I just kind of stopped. And then about 10 days out, maybe 10, 11 days ago, I just kind of decided it's not going to happen. I officially DNF'd it, but I counted my DNF as being the last day that I listened to the audiobook, which was like almost 3 weeks ago. So that one DNF, which unfortunately means that I have failed my first month of Bookopoly prompts. So in my reading journal, I have changed my logging to be, instead of done or not done, I have 3. I have done, which is completely shaded in. I have an attempted, which is just like a dot. And then I have not done, which is nothing, which means that I can at least show that I tried, but it didn't quite go the way that I wanted. Now let's get into the more fun parts of this and talk about the books that I did read. Starting us off is Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. This is the sequel to Ninth House and the second one in the Alex Stern novels. It follows Ninth House without going into too many spoilers, because this one does pick up right after Ninth House. In fact, I had to go and look up a synopsis of Ninth House, kind of chapter by chapter, to refresh myself, because I read Ninth House like 7 months ago. This one follows Alex in her search for Darlington, who has gone missing in Ninth House, and trying to figure out where he is and how to get him back. I thought this book was really strong. As usual, Leigh Bardugo does an excellent job with her characters. Her characters were a 10 out of 10 for me on my Cobb pile scale. I did feel like this book suffered from middle book syndrome a little bit. I know this is supposed to be a trilogy, and so it definitely felt like a little bit of a wrap up to Ninth House for sure. We did get some closure on some of the plot threads that are going on there, but there was also a lot of like things that got introduced that some of them got resolved in this book, but a lot of them didn't, and it was a lot of setup for what will be the finale of the series. So I am looking forward to that, but I am also, this one I felt less strongly about than I did Ninth House. However, I think part of that was also because I read Ninth House right after I was starting to get back into reading again, and so it probably hit harder than it would have had I read it now. Leigh Bardugo remains one of my favorite authors still, and I am super looking forward to that and anything else that she puts out. I know this year she's putting out The Familiar, which I am mega looking forward to. So next up in the month, I read Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. This is Ali Hazelwood's first foray into YA romance. I also felt like this was really good. I gave it 4 stars. The synopsis is that we have, oh god, what are their names? We have Mallory and Nolan. Mallory is an older sibling who has kind of taken care of her family ever since her father died a few years ago. And then we have Nolan, who is known as kind of an asshole, know-it-all chess player. And Mallory used to play chess a long time ago, but stopped for some unknown reason. And it seemed like that it had to do with her family, and that she feels like it would destroy her family if she started playing chess again. And you don't really know why for a long portion of the book. So for spoilers' sake, I'm not going to get into it. But her friend convinces her to play in a chess tournament with her, and she meets Nolan and beats him at chess when he's like the world champion. And then shenanigans ensue. I thought this was really sweet. I thought it was really cute. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. I also don't think that YA romance is for me necessarily, though. I think that I enjoyed all of Ali Hazelwood's books more than this, only because I like the adult romances a little bit better. However, I did think that this did a really good exploration of Mallory's character and growth as a teenager trying to grow up and find her place in the world. The romance was weaker to me than other romances, but the story was very good. So let me put it that way. This book was totally worth the read. I'm glad I have it. I want to have a complete Ali Hazelwood collection at some point, which I almost do. I now have, because I own Love on the Brain now, which you just saw a few days ago. I think I need her short story collection, and I think that's all I'm missing. I think that Mallory was a great protagonist. I think for older siblings, this is a good read, and you will probably relate a lot to it. Next in the month is a book that was not on my TBR. I finished the audiobook for it, and that is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Last year, one of my favorite books of the year that I read was Daisy Jones and the Six. I really, really loved it. I thought that Taylor Jenkins Reid did a great job of exploring characters that were not necessarily good people, and sort of making you root for them, but sort of making you understand that the world's just kind of sucky sometimes. It really just is not a great place. And I think Taylor Jenkins Reid did a great job of doing that again. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo follows Evelyn Hugo and actually a biographer or a journalist who is interviewing her for a book. And she is telling her life story to this journalist in a way that she hasn't told anybody before, not this candidly. The story took some twists and turns that I wasn't expecting necessarily, but you also knew some of it going in because a lot of this took place in the past. But it talks about how Hollywood was in the mid 1900s, the 40s, 50s, 60s, I think is where it started. I think it might start in the 50s and 60s into the 70s. It was really good. I had a great time with it. The audiobook was phenomenal. It has 3 different people narrating it, and I thought that that was really well done. I find it hard for audiobooks to capture me a lot of the time, and this one really did. It gave me a chance at being an audiobook person, which was really cool. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I know some people don't really like it, but I think if you're a Daisy Jones kind of person, you'll probably enjoy The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was great. And that one, because I don't think I actually said it out loud, was a 5-star read for me. I really loved it. The next book on my list for January was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. This was also a 5-star read. I started off my month extremely strong. I actually put out a video after I finished this one about how to kind of cure a book slump, or some ideas for curing a book slump, because this book put me in one because it was so good and nothing else measured up to it. This is a contender for my favorite book of the year already. Lessons in Chemistry follows a woman named Elizabeth Zott. However, this is one of the only books that I've read that is a true third person, where you're just kind of viewing it as you're going along. It's almost like watching a TV show, right? And you can see all of the different characters' perspectives within one paragraph, which I do really like, right? It's a little bit more old school in the style of writing, but I love it. This is one of the most powerful pieces of literature I have read thus far. The fact that Elizabeth Zott, in a lot of ways, is not a likable character, but also is so likable that you can't help but enjoy her. The complexity around it is just so good. This follows Elizabeth, who is a chemist. She is working in a lab and isn't treated very well because it's the 50s and 60s and women are not treated well in general in society. It's about her and her journey in finding her place in the world and helping other women to also find their place in the world, which is pretty dang cool if you ask me. I can't say much more without getting too much into spoilers, and I think the less you go into this with, the better. Oh lordy, did I enjoy this. This was so extremely good, and I think that Bonnie Garmus is an incredibly talented writer. She did an excellent job telling her story. This will sit with me for the rest of my life. It was very good. Next up, if you've seen all of my videos thus far, you know, but the next one I read after this was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This was probably the weakest book I read this month. Sorry. I know that's not a popular opinion. I know that's not really something that a lot of people feel. A lot of people really like this one. I just don't think V.E. Schwab is for me. I don't think she's my style of author. I think her prose is beautiful, but man, do I struggle with her stories. So this follows Addie, who is born in 1704, 1714. She's born in the 1700s, or she's from the 1700s. Eventually, she's going to be forced to marry this guy that she doesn't want to marry. And she's been trying to find her own way in the world and do her own thing. Eventually, she has to marry this guy, and she doesn't want to. And so she runs out into the forest, and there's this old woman who her whole life in the village who has been telling her about all these different gods and stuff like that. And this is when, Christianity is extremely strong. And so telling her about all these different gods. And then she says, don't pray at night. Don't pray to the gods who would answer at night. And then she does. She doesn't realize that the sun is setting, and she's like, I just wish that I wasn't having to marry this guy and that I could go be free to live my own life. And eventually somebody answers. His name is Luke. Well, he doesn't have a name. She names him Luke. And he says, sure, I'll grant your wish. But of course, he's one of the gods that answers at night. And so there's a catch. It's that anybody she meets will not remember her until somebody does. And his name is Henry. And he remembers her. She steals a book and he remembers her. And it's about them. It's about her and her life getting to that point, and then them after that point. And then obviously there's twists and turns along the way. The problem that I have with this book is that it really, really dragged through the whole first 60%, I would say, for me, where I just didn't really care. And the only thing I really cared about was Henry. But then Henry was also kind of bland, it felt like. I just didn't care. And then when I did care, I got roped in the last half of the book. And then the ending, like, they had it. And then the ending, the very last chapter, I'm not going to go into spoilers on what happens necessarily, but the very last chapter left me with a really bitter, unsatisfied taste in my mouth. And so it's a 3-star. It's fine. It was fine. I would recommend it for somebody to try it out because I can see how the writing style in this is amazing. It is very well written. I just didn't like the story. So I would recommend it still for somebody to try it out, but it's not something that I'm going to revisit. In fact, I am going to unhaul it. I'm unhauling my other V.E. Schwab book too because I'm never going to revisit them. I'm never going to revisit them, and somebody else is going to get more enjoyment out of them than me. The only thing that I will say that's sort of spoilery, so mild spoiler warning for the next 5 seconds or so. You have that along to skip ahead, let's say 10 seconds, just to make sure. Okay. The last half of the last chapter really was super sequel baity. It felt like there was going to be a sequel when there isn't. There isn't going to be one, at least not to my knowledge. And it set up, it was like cheap sequel bait. It was almost like it left you with well, okay then, but what? You can close the book on this story, that's fine, but you're going to leave it open at the last second, a crack to go somewhere else? I felt really sequel baity, and I didn't like that. I didn't like the fact that I felt cheated out of an ending. Overall, 3 stars. It was fine. I don't get it. I don't think V.E. Schwab's for me. The next book that I read was for the Citadel Book Club with Mel Reads, and that is What You Are Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama. This is one that I obviously have picked up physically since we talked. This was also a 3-star read for me. I liked it, and there were good messages in here. This is also a collection of short stories. There's 5 short stories in here. It was a quick and easy read, and I did annotate it because it was for the book club, but then also there are some lessons in here that you can take from it that are really good. The problem that I had with it is that the Japanese language, I took Japanese when I was in school, and the Japanese language is very literal, but also very contextual. It's interesting. It's very, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And that's kind of how it is here too. So there's not a lot of metaphor or anything like that, which is totally fine, but it did get a little bit repetitive feeling at times because of that, because I'm just used to a different writing style. And then the other thing too is that because I have done a lot of self-help journeying over the past couple of years, there were a lot of lessons in here that I'm like, yeah, man, that's what you need to do. Or there were characters that I'm like, yeah, man, this is what you need to do. But I also enjoyed still seeing their journeys and stuff. So 3 stars, it was good. It was fine. Again, probably not one that I'll revisit on a regular basis, but I would recommend it to anybody who wants to try out a translated work, because that's this is obviously translated from Japanese and is enjoyable enough, and also it does have some good morals. So if you're interested in that kind of a thing, I would recommend it. I also did really like the librarian. I thought that she was really good. Basically what this is all of the characters in this book, their center point is that they all wind up visiting this library, and then the librarian in the library helps them with some sort of life problem that they're having, right? So where they go in and they tell her, hey, I'm looking for this type of book. And she gives them the reference materials for that type of book, but then she also throws in something like really seemingly random on their sheet and gives them a little like token and a little like felt, because she does felting. So she gives them like a little felt token thing, and they take from that and go from there and figure out, oh, this is a thing I need to do in my life. So the librarian was a great character. Really, all of it was just very sweet, and I did really enjoy it. It was a good, like, feel good kind of a book. 3 stars. It was fine, but probably not like my favorite book I've ever read. Next up is one that I read on Kindle Unlimited, and that is Mile High by Liz Tomford. This was a 4-star read for me. I was nervous going in, if we remember from my TBR video, which came out a few weeks ago, that I was nervous coming into it because a lot of people said they didn't like the male main character, and I get why. So this follows Xanders and Stevie. Xanders is a professional hockey player for Chicago, and that's why it's the Windy City #1, because we're in the Windy City. And Stevie's a flight attendant on their private jet. They meet on the jet. Xanders is kind of a womanizer. It's a fairly standard, like, he's a womanizer until he meets his one, and then he's not anymore, yada yada. He does make stupid decisions throughout the book. He does a lot of doing things without consulting Stevie first, and that's like his big character flaw, and I think for a lot of people that turns them off of the book and his character, which again, I totally get. But for me, because it's a book and because we are there to experience some form of character growth, I think that that is his character growth, is to realize that he can be loved by other people and that he doesn't have to do things just to protect people. So that's kind of his character growth. And then Stevie is trying to figure out how to be confident in herself, and Xanders helps her feel that way. And I think the reason why I like this one is because I identify a lot with Stevie, where I wasn't like super confident in myself, and like Stevie's mom is a piece of work. So in that way, I don't necessarily relate, because I mean, you heard my phone call in my last video if you watched it with my mom. We obviously have a very different relationship than what Stevie has with her mom, but you know, she just doesn't feel confident in herself, and she's very body conscious and she has a lot going on in the back of her mind at all times, and that was extremely relatable to me. And my partner helps me not feel that way. And so that is something that I really related to with the two of them. So I think part of what brought this up for me is the fact that it was relatable. This one was also just barely in 4-star range for me. It was good and I enjoyed it, but there were definitely problems that I had. It was fairly predictable. The third act breakup happens, which I'm so sick of that trope, but I also get that there needs to be conflict in the third act. So in the romance, I get it, but that is where I was at with it. It was good. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun, but 4 stars I think is the appropriate rating for it because of how I felt coming out of it. I'm excited to get into The Right Move, which is the second book in the series, which I am planning on reading in February. The next book on the list that I read this month is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is my first classic of the year, my first of 5 supposedly, at minimum. We're gonna see if I actually hit that 5, but I'm starting off strong by getting 1 knocked out early in the year. This was an interesting read for me. I gave this one 3 stars because the writing style, it was published in 1813, so the writing style is hard to get used to, but the fact that I have seen Bridgerton, I haven't read the Bridgerton novels, but I've seen Bridgerton, so I at least understood the concepts of a lot of what they're talking about regardless, because it's a Regency drama. The other thing is the characters, again, this was published in 1813, so characters are a lot more complicated I think now than they were back then. The characters were a little flat, however, I did enjoy it still. This follows Elizabeth Bennet and Fitzwilliam Darcy, mostly Elizabeth Bennet. Her love interest is Darcy. It's about a Regency drama between the two of them. Darcy's not a really liked guy in town. Elizabeth Bennet comes from a not super well off in the sense of still part of a Regency drama, but not in the sense of the society that they're in. And so the two of them getting together slowly over time, right? This is definitely would qualify for me as a slow burn romance. It's very cute. It's very sweet. I need to watch the movie now, I think, too, because I think that's where a lot of people get their love of this story. The main thing for me that brought this down to a 3-star is each time I picked up the book, I had to read a couple of pages out loud to myself, as close to a British accent as I could, because that would get me in the zone and get me in the rhythm of the writing style. If I didn't do that, I couldn't get it. I tried to not do it a couple of times, and I literally ended up reading the same paragraph 6 times, and then I would finally be okay, I'm just gonna, and I would read it out loud, and then I would get into it and be able to sit and read. So it took me longer to finish this than I would have liked, but I also understand that, like, that's to be expected because the writing style is so different from contemporary writing. This was also just barely under a 4-star read for me, so things to consider. I still consider it an above average read, but it still landed in the 3-star territory. Keep in mind while I'm rating these books that 3 stars is not a bad rating. It's just average or maybe slightly above average. 3 stars is I liked it. I'd recommend it. So that's why, like, The Invisible Life, What You're Looking For Is in the Library, Pride and Prejudice, all of them got 3 stars, but I still enjoyed them. And I'm going to hold on to all of them except for Invisible Life just because I think that somebody else would like that more. And so I'm going to give it to a friend. But like these two, I'm going to keep for sure. You know, it just depends. We have 2 more books that I finished in the month of January. The second to last book that I finished this month was The Case Study of Vanitas by Jun Mochizuki. Is that who it is? Yeah. And this was so much fun. I so enjoyed this one. Oh my god. So this was a 5-star read for me. It got very high on the Compile ratings. I thought that the characters were phenomenal. The chaos that comes from this story is hilarious. They're basically on every page. There are exceptions to this, but on every page there is at least one panel that makes me laugh out loud, like actually giggling to myself. My partner thought I was a Looney Tune while I was doing this. So this follows Noe and Vanitas. Noe is a vampire and Vanitas is he calls himself a vampire doctor. And I don't really want to go much more into that other than the fact that these two are kind of an unlikely pair, but they are so much fun, and their friendship, which is just starting to develop, is so fun. And I am really liking it, and I cannot wait to pick up the second through however many volumes because I'm definitely going to continue with this. It's also, the art style is so cool and I love the aesthetic. It takes place in like a fantasy version of Paris in like the 1800s, and it's a lot of fun. Also, thank you, Kira, for the recommendation. You were correct. This is my jam. And then the last book that I read in the month of January was The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. This is the prequel to Throne of Glass and is hotly debated what the reading order should be for it. I obviously decided to read Assassin's Blade first and then go into Throne of Glass. I know that a lot of people prefer to read it, I think, third or fourth in the series. I will say this. So this follows Selena. She is an assassin for the Kingdom of Adarlan. Darlin? I don't know exactly. She is a very skilled assassin. She's been training since she was 8. She's now 17 in this book, or just about 17. And it follows her through a series of adventures, I guess is the word you could use, or missions, things that she has to do. But they all tie together, so it does kind of read like its own novel, but they're short stories, so they do break up into like their specific like periods of time. It gives a lot of backstory to Selena's character, and I had previously attempted to read Throne of Glass and almost DNF'd it because I hated Selena. In the first chapter or two, she's just so arrogant and pushy and but also naive at the same time, and so it was just so frustrating to read her character. With that being said, reading this first and getting her backstory prior to the events of Throne of Glass and how she got to where she is at the very start of it, that's extremely helpful for me. I needed that context in order for me to not absolutely hate her. My personal recommendation, so far at least, is to read Assassin's Blade first. I went back and forth on Instagram about it with a few people. There was one person who said it the best, in that she said that she heard a lot of people who regretted reading it fourth, but almost nobody who regretted reading it first. And that's what convinced me to read it first, which I'm so glad I did. It ended up being a 4-star read for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love me a basic fantasy story. That was very nice to read. And I am excited to get to the rest of the story. Something I do want to note is I did have Crescent City on my TBR for February, but then I saw a few different places recommend that you read because Crescent City ties Throne of Glass and ACOTAR kind of together. I want to read Throne of Glass first, which was a thing I've signed myself up for now. So instead of House of Earth and Blood, I am reading Throne of Glass and maybe Crown of Midnight, because I know Crescent City is much longer than Throne of Glass. So I might do 2 of the Throne of Glass novels to make up for that. That's kind of my plan. So this is the book I'm reading now, but it's going to take me into February. That is it for my January reading wrap up. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you did by leaving a like down below, or a comment on what your favorite book that you read in the month of January was. Or if you have any differing opinions on any of my books, I'd love to hear them. I love to hear what people have to say about the books that I read. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you are practicing safe text. Bye.